So let's have a look at unconscious guilt. Excuse the irony. Now, because the course teaches us that there aren't any degrees, we know that the small upsets are the big upsets. The big upsets are small upsets. It's measurement's irrelevant. We know in the lesson there are no small upsets. I'm never upset for the reason I think. These things go together, okay? So with unconscious guilt, what I like to say to people is imagine you are in a beautiful lake. Let's say it's in the Swiss Alps. There's a lovely, beautiful lake that is like a mill pond. There isn't a single disturbance on the surface or an undercurrent. It's just the most gentle body of water. And you're sitting in a little rowing boat. You haven't got any oars. You don't need any oars. You're just in this really beautiful, serene place. In your hand, you have an object which is, I'm going to say, like a bread roll. So it's something that's got enough weight that when you drop it over the side of the boat into the water, it's going to sink, but it's not going to be like a stone that sinks straight away. The bread roll represents conscious thought. Conscious thought comes into our minds through experience. And when we drop that bread roll out of this boat into this body of water and we look over the side of the boat, we see the bread roll sinking down. There's obviously going to be a period of that descent of the roll which is within our grasp. So our arms are going to be, let's say, I don't know, a couple of feet long or whatever it is. And we reach in and we can grab the bread roll and we can lift it out and we can put it in the boat back where we were. Once it goes beyond our reach, then it's going to sink down into the darker depths of the water and it's no longer going to be within our grasp. So in the context of conscious thought, we have a thought that comes into our mind. We analyze it, we process it whilst it's in our awareness, and then we can deal with the content of it if it's something that needs to be cleansed of a negative perception. If it's got some ego characteristics to that thinking, then obviously if we're progressive people and we're looking for peace, then we're going to look at that conscious thought and think, oh, why am I thinking that? How do I eradicate my investment in this thought and switch over to the Holy Spirit of a love of just pure forgiveness? And once that thought becomes unconscious, then the way that we access it isn't in the same framework of just considering what's just happened, how we feel about it, whether we're comfortable with it, whether we feel it's come from an egoic standpoint, or whether we feel it's come from the point of love and forgiveness of the Holy Spirit. So then what happens is the mind projects that out onto the world. And we know from our beautiful friend Ken that the world is an outward picture of an inward condition. Project is actually a really handy metaphor. Projection as a word is obviously not by accident that we've ended up with this terminology, because in as much as to consider a movie theatre, you know, the projector is what fires the image onto the screen. The world is the screen. Other people populate the screen as we see it. But the narrative, the script, is our own. So when we are presented with the behavior in another that is triggering, and the reason trigger is come into our vocabulary these days is obviously because of the definition representing like a gun firing, and also because it brings something up in us, doesn't it? So when we're triggered, it's an emotional flashback. It's not a mental flashback. It's not a thought that go, oh yeah, I remember that. It's a feeling. It's an emotional flashback. We're triggered by something outside on the screen. people on the screen are behaving in a way that they don't know our script. Our script is our script. It's our narrative. They're just populating this space that we're looking upon. So when they behave in a way that we're not comfortable with, they're not in their head going, Leon doesn't like it when this behavior happens, so I'm going to do this behavior to annoy him. It's our own narrative, and it's the unconscious thoughts, it's the unconscious guilt that we feel about something that we have let drop down into the dark waters that we never accessed during that period of time when the thought was conscious. And the great thing about unconscious thought is it was conscious once, and it just needs awareness. All these things just need awareness. Unconscious guilt is perpetuated by unawareness. So to counter that, if we cast the light of awareness on what is making us feel triggered, we can get to the root of it, bring it back into awareness, get to the bottom of it, and then cast forgiveness on the situation and let it go. So when we see ourselves triggered by a behavior that someone else exhibits, then that's our mind showing us what's in the unconscious realm, what we can't access. If there's a filing cabinet and you can get to the conscious stuff and go, oh, right, I've got that to work on for a forgiveness task. It's like, great. Then there's like another file, or there's another drawer in the cabinet that we maybe have locked or we can't get to, or it's too dark in there. That stuff, that's like as important as the stuff that we can get to, or vice versa, because there's no degrees. We're never upset for the reason we think. There's no small upsets. So then we can be grateful for this unconscious guilt. And the way the ego will work is like, I had a really interesting experience in December of last year. And when I got to the bottom of it, which I didn't do on my own, I had the great assistance of my wife. I found that this trigger was something which was effectively over 40 years old, buried in my unconscious mind. So the story is, I am at a training center. I'm in a room with 14 other students and a teacher. And what I noticed was when fellow students were taking the water bottles that had been put on our tables, clicking the lid off, pouring them into the glass and then putting the bottle back down, I was like, watching this behavior, and I was horrified. I was like, really, it sort of made me tense right up, and I was just like, oh my god, and I'm basically projecting guilt onto them and attacking them at the same time from an ego point of view. And the ego is really clever like that. It has the two narratives running concurrently. So at one point, as it's going, oh, look at that, and projecting guilt onto this person who doesn't know that by pouring water, they're summoning up something in me. So there's the guilt for that. And then there's the attack of just like, bloody hell, what are you doing that for? Because you're making me feel uncomfortable. And I went back to my room in the evening. This course lasted a week. It was a residential course, and this probably happened over 2 or 3 nights. And I'd go back to my room in the evening, and I'm sitting down, I'm thinking, what is this all about? Why do I care that somebody's pouring water into a glass in a carefree way? So therefore, when I got to get to the root of that question, the answer is going to be the flip side. I'm triggered by the fact that they don't care about the noise they make when they pour some water. So why is that? That's because I am conscious and uncomfortable pouring water without being aware of that. So part of the understanding came from me reflecting on how the next day, so I'm triggered by them doing that. The next day, I noticed that when I'm listening to the teacher and I don't want anybody in the room's attention to be focused on me or away from the teacher. I don't want to have a negative influence, so I really quietly take the lid off the bottle and I pick up my glass and just go and put the glass on an angle, the classic like that. Put it down again, put the glass over there like that, and silently sip from it. There's the answer, it's the flip side. So then I'm lucky that my wife is very lucky, she's a QHHT practitioner. So for those of you who don't know, this is called quantum hypnosis healing technique. And she's able to tap into the universal consciousness. And quite a while later, like quite a few weeks later, I think, she said to me one day, she was talking about my issues with my dad as a child and what he symbolized in my life and how there was conflict between the two of us. And she said, did your dad always like really take the limelight and then you shrunk back in order to not impinge on him needing to be larger than he was, because he had his own issues of compensation. He had his own inner narrative and script that he was projecting onto his screen. And as a character in his dream, what I was doing was reading his behavior of like on a clairsentient kind of level. And because I was aware of what he was doing, even as a little kid, I was compensating, I was shrinking back to not limit his activity as he needed to make himself bigger than he was, to take the extra light because he had stuff in his childhood where he hadn't had attention, blah, blah, blah. And she said to me, did this happen? And I was like, oh my God, yes, I've got it. Yeah, you're right. So once she put that thought in my head, that gave me the context to then come back to this event, which was 40 years later, where I am watching myself going, oh, being uncomfortable because somebody isn't demonstrating this this activity, this consideration that I'd had my entire life of like, oh, shrink back. So that unconscious guilt that had laid in my mind down in the bottom of the lake for 40 years. How did I get to it? It was projected out onto other people, other characters in my dream. They didn't know the script because they were working from their own script. I had to reflect, I had to contemplate. I was lucky to have the addition of my wife's perspective, as I say. And then we're lucky that everything that was conscious, everything that is unconscious was once conscious. So we can get to it, but we can no longer get to it in a direct path. That was a very convoluted, circuitous route, wasn't it? From that event in childhood that was repeated over and over and over and over again. And I took it into adulthood. It wasn't a direct, oh, I know why I'm doing this. That was really buried and really hidden. It took introspection. But what do? We just say, Holy Spirit, can you look at this with me? Jesus, can you look at this with me? Why do we do that? We do that because we then create the space between us and the behavior. So if we can kind of objectify this behavior and position it somewhere outside of our self as we see ourselves to be, that gives us a little bit of distance to not be it and for it to be us. We look at it and we go, right, that's behavior. I'm here. That's behavior. Ken, again, what he said was, we don't ask Jesus to come down here where we are. We go to where Jesus is. So Jesus is above the battleground. He's in his position of stately calm. He's like outside the dream. And if we ask the Holy Spirit or Jesus to look at something with us, effectively what we're doing is we're not only just positioning ourselves like away from the behavior, we're positioning ourselves outside the dream, and we're we're drawing on this huge reservoir of assistance that can come in once we create the space for it to come in. And we say, look, what is this? You know, how do I see what's going on here? How do I remove the investment in the ego responses? And by doing so, then the truth can go, ah, and then once the truth breathes and we can connect with the truth of the situation, then we can apply the forgiveness. But we're not applying, I'm not applying forgiveness to the people in the classroom who poured the water. I'm applying forgiveness to me, to my mind, for thinking that, for carrying that narrative buried all of those years inside myself, because that's how you diffuse the ego's bomb. You know, you sort of, if you were angry with yourself or if you condemned yourself, you had any of those responses that aren't coming from love, and you went, oh, if I went, Leon, why have you carried that around all these years, you know, and you've projected, that's not, then the ego's got me again, because then the ego's going, yeah, Leon, why did you do that? And I'm like, yeah, we're on side, because what are you doing? Once you're projecting outside, where are you looking? Outside yourself. What does the ego not want you to do? What's its main thought that encapsulates everything about it that Jesus tells us? It says, seek and do not find. So if you're going to seek and do not find, what's the best thing for that to happen? To not look within. Because the moment you look within, you're going to find the answers if you do that from a point of grace, if you do that in a sense that says, help, you know, help, I don't know, help, of myself I can do nothing. Why are all these things in this thought system? Because it's the truth, because these are the mechanisms, this is the roadmap. These are the ways that we are going to tap into the reserves that are greater than our tiny little point of localized consciousness. So there's a, you know, then instead of like going from an ego point of view at myself for going, oh, why did you think that? Then I forgive myself for thinking that. I get to the bottom of it and I go, I thought that because of okay, I can see why I thought that. Next time it comes up, I'll know what it is. Then I'll withdraw, and it'll start to just fade away, but it will be replaced by something else, because there'll be another behavior. But again, it will rise up from the unconscious. It will present itself in the world, projected onto someone else. And then the moment you get that sense of anything that isn't just love, you think, aha, there's something in this. So if there's something in this, then there's where your next bit of work is for your part of the atonement, the undoing, and how to free your part of the mind of the interference that's blocking your awareness from love's eternal presence. Phew! Got all that out. And there's some more. Okay, I've just made a look, just taken a look at some of my notes here, and projecting is an avoidance technique that distracts the mind from looking within. The ego says, look at that behavior we don't like. What it's really saying, seeing, is how come that person isn't uncomfortable? Excuse me a minute. There we go, someone's arrived. How come that person isn't uncomfortable with that behavior that I'm uncomfortable doing myself? Little s. The attack gets its charge from an annoyance that the other person isn't carrying our backstory. And the backstory is inhibiting our behavior, or it's influencing our behavior. So that's part of the annoyance. It's like basically what you're saying is like, why aren't you annoyed by that? You know, I am. There is no other. There is no world. Have an amazing day.